Welcome, everyone. Thank you for taking time out of your very busy day to join us. Again, my name is Amber Farn. My pronoun is she, her, hers. I'm the Deputy Director for Certificate Programs here at the Center for Juvenile Justice Reform. We are a research center under McCourt School of Public Policy at Georgetown University. And our center is dedicated to advancing youth justice transformation through research, through training, capacity building initiatives. And one of the key ways that we achieve this is through our certificate programs that I oversee. The certificate programs here at CJJR utilize a multi-system approach to address critical issues in the field of youth justice. And these programs are designed as intensive multi-day professional development opportunities for current and future leaders who are committed to enhancing outcomes for youth involved in or at risk of being involved in the justice system. The curriculum is designed to equip participants with knowledge, leadership skills, and practical strategies that y'all can take back to your home jurisdiction and create meaningful system transformation efforts. And we call these efforts a capstone project. So by focusing on these topics such as advancing racial justice, supporting LGBTQ plus youth, transforming juvenile probation, serving youth in custody, participants are empowered to drive systemic improvements and create lasting impacts within their communities. And today, I am so thrilled to have our certificate program fellows from Los Angeles and Nebraska joining us and talking about their capstone projects and their journey to creating an inclusive culture that supports LGBTQ plus youth. And we hope that you'll find this webinar informative and helpful to inspire you into taking actions. Many of you are aware LGBTQ plus youth are overrepresented across systems of care, including the youth justice system. They face a lot of unique challenges. They're more likely to be bullied, maltreated, and rejected by others, including their own families. This often leads to running away and truancy. They often receive excessive punishments at school and also in secure facilities. They're more likely than their heterosexual peers to be held in secure detention for relatively minor offenses. And so creating a safe, affirming, and inclusive environment for LGBTQ GNCT youth is very important, and it's an important first step in making sure we're supporting these kids as we do for all the other kids. And I say the first step because this is just by creating an inclusive environment, not enough, but that is the first thing that we have to do. So we hope today's conversation will provide you with some insights into the nuances of navigating this topic on the ground in practice. We hope that you will be able to learn from and find inspiration from our awesome panelists through their work within their communities, through today's conversation. And before we turn to the panelists, I want to turn to our dear friend and partners at Series Policy Research and National Center for Lesbian Rights. They're instrumental in our development and execution of the Supporting System Involved LGBTQ Youth Certificate Program. Without them, you will not be hearing from us, or today's webinar wouldn't have materialized. So, Aisha and Danny, can I turn to you to introduce yourself? Aisha, I see that you're a pin, so I'm going to pass it to you.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thank you, Amber. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm so happy to see such a large turnout. My name is Aisha Canfield. I am a director at Series Policy Research. My pronouns are she, her. For the last almost 15 years, I've been working with mostly juvenile probation departments all over the country to implement more robust data collection systems that capture what we call SOGI data. So that data can be analyzed along with race and ethnicity data so that we can make a more holistic, data-driven referrals and case plans and placements that really consider the intersectional identities of young people that are coming into our facilities and that are on probation. We also know from the research that so many of those young people are also involved in child welfare. And so really looking intentionally at LGBT youth of color who are dually involved and thinking about off-ramps and permanency that can affirm their multiple layers of identities. In addition to that, I serve as a program evaluator, uplifting community-based organizations that can serve as really promising and viable opportunities out of the justice system and out of child welfare for LGBT youth of color. So I'm excited to be on faculty again this year for the certificate program and look forward to working with all of you.
Thank you, Aisha. Let's see. I am looking.
Hi, everyone.
Oh, hi, Danny.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes,
I'm looking
okay.
for you in the participants list to pin you. Oh, there you are.
Hi, thank you. Hopefully you don't hear some with background noise. My name is Danielle Danny King. I'm Senior Youth Policy Counsel at the National Center for Lesbian Rights. I've been working for the last 8 years in foster youth and juvenile justice, youth advocacy. I come to this work as someone with lived experience, having went through the foster care system myself in New York and aging out of foster care in the early 2000s in New York City. I started my career representing youth in family court in Manhattan and Queens in New York, youth from the ages of 0 to 21. And, for me, as someone with lived experience, I really saw how, there were changes that were made, since I was in the system, but I didn't see enough change. And it was very hard to represent young folks and see them going through similar situations that I went through myself going through the system. And, that, really pushed me besides my interest in doing policy work, but to really try to see how I can work on bigger picture issues. And so, that led me to eventually transitioning to the National Center for Lesbian Rights. And in my current role, I focus on policy advocacy and child welfare, juvenile justice, and education space on behalf of LGBTQ youth. And so a lot of my work is legislative work in New York, California, and some federal, as well as consulting with folks in other states with legislation that they may have pending related to child welfare, juvenile justice, education. And in addition, I serve on the executive steering committee for the Board of State Community Corrections in California, and also on the research and data subcommittee of mandated reporting to community supporting task force. And so a lot of what I try to focus on in my child welfare and juvenile justice work specifically is more on an abolition focus of thinking about how we can, keep folks out of these systems and, keep families together and keep young folks out of, jails, prison cells as much as possible. So I'm, very glad to see you all here and hopefully, you apply to the program. And I think, it's great to see folks wanting to make some meaningful change in their communities.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you, Aisha. Well, so today I'm also joined by my colleague, Christine Humowitz. Christine will be co-facilitating today's conversation, and I'll turn it to her to let her introduce herself.
Thanks, Amber. And hi, everyone. My name is Christine Humowitz. I work alongside Amber on the certificate program team at the Center for Juvenile Justice Reform. My main roles are around the capstone process. So as Amber mentioned, every team or individual who participates in a certificate program at CJJR is responsible for creating a capstone project or local reform effort informed by the learning they do with us at our programs. I also manage CJJR's Fellows network, and that's a group of about 2,000 folks from across the country who have attended a certificate program and begun implementation on a local reform effort. And so we are super lucky today to be joined by 4 fellows from the LGBTQ Youth Certificate Program. We are joined by Luis Quinones from LA, who is a fellow of the 2022 program, and then LaShare Carter, Sean Johnson, and Tina Wigington from Douglas County, Nebraska, who are fellows of the 2018 program. So we're super excited to have this conversation with them today about their work related to creating inclusive cultures for LGBTQ youth in their home communities. And so I will go ahead and turn it over to them for introductions and to kind of give us a brief overview of their capstone project and the work that they've done related to it. So Luis, I'll start with you if you don't mind introducing yourself and giving us kind of an overview of your capstone.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Luis Quinones. I'm, as Christine said, the Special Projects Manager here in South LA for HOPICS, which, a big acronym, which is for Homeless Outreach Program Integrated Care System. Perfect, listed right there perfectly. We are the lead agency here in South LA that deals with all things housing, So we're the lead for families and for single adults. So my capstone project was the Tay Bridge program. And the Tay Bridge program focused on the reunification of LGBTQ youth, specifically Tay youth ages 18 to 25, with their families when possible. And we did that through two different ways. We did that through listening sessions and through workshops. So what's interesting about this program is that we had three different populations. We had, of course, the LGBTQ youth, their families, and faith communities. And when I talk about faith communities, I'm specifically talking about Black Protestant churches that we have here in LA to join in this conversation around reunification and what does that mean. So it was very transformative, a lot of conversations. And at the end of this program, it was a 3-year pilot. We designed an online course with Fuller Seminary, which is a seminary here in Pasadena, California, for pastors to have conversations around, inclusive language, how to make their space more affirming, how to open up the church, how to change their welcome letter. So giving these resources to pastors, we felt was really the lifeline after Bridge. And what does that look like? So I know I'll talk a little bit more about Bridge and kind of the nuances behind it. So that's where I'll stop. Thanks for the invite.
Thanks so much, Luis. Now I will turn to the Douglas County folks to introduce themselves and their work. Whichever of y'all would like to go first, go ahead.
I'll go. Hi, I'm Shawn Johnson, and I am at the Douglas County Juvenile Assessment Center in Douglas County, which represents the pre-adjudication part of our system. And I won't go into LaShare's or Tina's piece, but I will just give a kind of brief overview of our capstone team. We had a team that really represented the entire spectrum of our juvenile justice system when we were so fortunate to come to Georgetown in 2018. We had a leader from our local juvenile justice system reform efforts, myself from the Juvenile Assessment Center, LaShare representing detention at that time, Tina representing probation. We had the juvenile court bench represented by a juvenile court judge from Douglas County, and we had a phenomenal community leader, advocate. She was an ED of a national organization, and a person with lived experience in the juvenile justice system. So that was one person on that last one. So our team really was well represented to be able to make some systemic change. And we really came out with a 2-tiered approach. I won't go into the details yet, but our approach was to come back to our community and to our system with both a training and education piece and then a data collection piece moving forward. So I think we'll probably get into some of the details of that later.
Tina, LaShare, do y'all want to introduce yourself as well?
Yes, my name is Tina Wigington. Sorry, my Zoom closed on me, and so I had to re-log back on. I am the placement coordinator with the state of Nebraska Juvenile Probation here in Douglas County, so Omaha. So that is my role.
Hi, I'm LaShare Carter. I'm currently with the Juvenile Assessment Center up under Shawn. Previously, I was a detention supervisor with Douglas County Youth Center here in Omaha. I've been in other spaces as well as I've worked with probation. So I've had over 20 years of experience working with juveniles in the system.
Awesome. Thank y'all. So as y'all can kind of see, Luis kind of represents the more community provider side, and then our folks from Douglas County are a little bit more of the system side. So I think today kind of finding the differences in how they created inclusive cultures for LGBTQ youth as well as the similarities will create a really, really awesome discussion. So with that, we will go ahead and dive into things here. I'd love to start with a conversation around kind of partnerships and communication strategies. So like Amber mentioned at CJJR, we really promote a multi-system approach to reform efforts. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more from each of y'all about how you identified kind of the key stakeholders that you needed to get on board as part of your capstone projects and kind of what strategies you use to engage those partners. So I'll start with Douglas County, if y'all don't mind, because I think, Sean, y'all touched on this a little bit already. But kind of how did you land on the group of people that you did around your team that came to Georgetown for the certificate program, and kind of how did you gain buy-in from all of those folks?
That's an easy one, actually. When we had some active system reform efforts going on at the time of the opportunity coming up, and we just really had a discussion among agency leaders of, from each agency, which person could represent the agency, make some decisions for the agency to implement changes, and also would have a passion for helping LGBTQ youth. And so there wasn't an issue about buy-in. We really just sought the leaders who could make a difference and who already were bought into the work. I don't know, Tina or LaShare, if you would want to add anything to that, but it came together like magic here. So.
Yeah, no, I think you said it great.
That's awesome. In terms of kind of the staff that y'all had back home in Douglas County, kind of when you returned from the certificate program, or were kind of contemplating incorporating additional SOGI questions into the assessment process, did y'all face any kind of pushback from those stakeholders and the staff that would have to be asking those questions? And if you did, kind of how did you kind of gather their concerns and use those concerns to kind of inform what you were doing in Douglas County?
I'm going to just hop on quick, and I think I'll throw it to Tina. But we did that two-tiered approach. So we didn't implement the questions immediately upon our return. We really strategically had everyone trained. And so the community advocate that I mentioned, Dominique, did a beautiful job of literally SOGI 101 was what the trainings were called, and they trained folks across the system. So every member of every one of our agencies, from diversion to detention to probation, was trained, as well as courtside. There was a training that included all the juvenile court judges, defense counsel, and county attorneys. And so everyone was speaking a common language, and everyone was understanding that there are unique needs of LGBTQ GNC youth that we needed to recognize and really be intentional around. And so we went from the training into implementing questions. And that is the only resistance that I can say from our end that we felt were staff members who had some slight comfortability issues. That was worked out during the training phase. Those open conversations were worked out during the training phase. And I think I'm going to throw it to Tina for probably a little bit more.
Yeah, and just to kind of piggyback off of that, we started instituting the questions, after going through that same process. And then I would keep track of, the officers and the responses, because we would give the kids the options to, if they didn't want to answer the questions, they didn't have to, right? But there were certain officers that were having a higher percentage of kids saying that they didn't want to participate. So then it was just more education around, it was the officers' uncomfortability about asking the questions. And so then it was just more process of talking through that with them. And then they finally came around and they had a better understanding. So I think on top of that initial training, then going back and following up and having some further conversations with staff that were struggling with it, and everything. And I think it was just a lack of just knowledge and education about that.
Awesome. Thank y'all for that. I think what y'all laid out is so important, making sure everyone has a common understanding of the kind of why behind what you're doing first through that training piece, and then kind of implementing that reform around the SOGI question, making sure everyone understands the importance of it so they are comfortable doing that. I love that. Luis, I want to turn to you on this question around partnership, specifically around the church partnerships and faith community partnerships that you mentioned. Do you mind diving a little deeper into kind of why faith-based communities are such important partners in South LA and kind of what the key challenges were in engaging them in your work?
Well, before we even talk or touch, faith-based communities or churches, we had to do a lot of internal work as an organization to understand, the nuances of a youth program and, kind of like Douglas County, having that training, that internal training for other folks, which is really important, right? At Hopics, this was our first ever youth program. We traditionally worked with, for the, 30 plus years we've been in organization, we've only worked with families and single adults. So having this youth program, this new one, different way to work with folks, different way to new populations that we work with, especially specifically LGBTQ youth, which we don't work with at all until, Bridge came along, was new for us. So it was a lot of training, it was a lot of, understanding, a lot of conversations and, partnering with our, agencies around South LA as well who do work with youth saying, hey, we're starting this program. So what do you think? What are some nuances? What are you seeing? What do you do reunification? Am I stepping on your toes? So having those conversations are really important before talking to these pastors. But when it comes to talking to pastors, I kind of approached it in a sense where, we kind of stated it in the beginning saying, hey, we're not here to change your theology. We're not here to, tell you what to do inside your church. But, here are the numbers. Here's the data. And I know we'll talk about data in a little bit. But data, showing the numbers, showing how many youth are really being impacted within their own community, really open up their eyes and their mindset on, there's a problem here. Like this is real. This is happening in my backyard. Like what's going on? So, getting some buy-in can be a little bit tricky in the beginning. You have your more conservative pastors who come from a more conservative denomination. But luckily, the stars aligned. The 3 years that I was working on this and, the Methodist Church, if you don't know, was splitting during that time because of these topics, because of these issues. So I kind of took advantage of that and, talked to those pastors and churches who are kind of on the fence on these topics and said, hey, we have this program. What do you think? Are you open? And, a lot of churches, I had a pastor tell me, hey, Luis, I've been waiting to open my church up to be more affirming. And your program has really pushed me to do that. I've been waiting for this resource. Like I don't have the resources in South LA, as you said, Christine, that they are the pillars in the community. Churches are the pillars in the community. They're really big. They're, most of South LA demographically is, Latinx or, part of the Black African American community. So, for people of color like myself, faith is really important. As a person of faith myself, this was important to, talk to these pastors. And I think that's really helped with the connection. Like I have a faith background. Both my parents are ministers. So I speak the same language, as pastors. So that really helped with the connection as well, where, pastors could drop their guard a little bit. They know I'm not coming from a attacking you theologically way. Like I'm not here to challenge you, but I'm just here to say, okay, here are the numbers. Here's what we can do. How can we work together to, push this program forward? So that's really been my approach with working specifically with pastors.
That's awesome. And I want to kind of dig into your listening sessions with youth and families and pastors too, because I think that was a really cool way to kind of get their thoughts, interact with them in a meaningful way. And I want to learn more about kind of how you structured those listening sessions and how you kind of used what you got from those listening sessions to inform what you were doing.
Definitely. So our listening sessions were typically an hour and a half sessions with, they were either a group or individual. So it depends on the population, right? We didn't mix populations. So we didn't have listening sessions between youth and pastors, even though that would have been really cool. But that wasn't the purpose of, this program, at least at this moment. And those sessions, they were really, at least for, all three populations, specifically for pastors, they were really research-based questions saying, we worked with a seminary to help us with pastors so we can, because of those answers, we developed that online course from those pastors. So some of the questions that we asked for pastors were like, what's it like? Have you had these conversations within your congregation? What kind of resources do you have already within your church? What does that look like? Can an LGBTQ person, be in charge, in the church? Kind of understand what's going on within their congregation and, see, where we can step in and where we can't. And now when it comes to youth and parents, we asked the same things, trying to understand, if reunification is possible, if that's something the youth want to do. This was very youth led, right? We're not going to do anything that the youth doesn't want to do. We're not going to put them back into the home and re-traumatize them without, therapy and family therapy and conversations. It's very youth driven. So they're number one, always. So we have these questions like, hey, what's going on at home? What's been your relationship like with your parents now since you've been kicked out? Are you about to be kicked out? What does that look like? And I want to read a quote so we have a home for trans women at Hopics. It's called Casa de Zuma. It's from, all ages from 18 plus higher. And that was actually the first listening session that I had was with the trans women. And one of the questions that I asked was, what was interrupted when you started to live your truth? One of the responses that kind of took me back was, as a kid, when family takes you to church, you are loved and welcomed by everyone. When you come out as trans, those same people turn their backs on you. Everything changes. At an early age, children who sing at church receive so much love and admiration from everyone. You go through things on your own when you come out as trans. I have known from an early age that I was attracted to men, even being in church. When reality hits everyone like a bomb, you are left on your own. So hearing those stories, hearing that feedback, took me back, and it kind of, it was a lot to hear, hearing what these women have gone through within the church, sexual-based, faith-based sexual exclusion and, being turned back on, and when I tell these stories, when I give these quotes to these pastors, that was a big thing, they heard these in the listening sessions, like this is the feedback we're hearing from people who have been going to the church. And some of them, they miss the church. They miss that community. So those listening sessions were really to understand, what's going on, what's the story, kind of the storytelling piece, and how can we really, build off of that to, not only have Bridge, but also create more resources after on so Bridge can continue living on for years to come.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that lifts up a really important point about understanding the population that you're serving, especially around those qualitative pieces, but also in Douglas County's case, those quantitative pieces as well about understanding the identities of the kids in care is a really, really kind of important part of creating that inclusive environment, making sure you know who themselves are actually in that environment. So I want to dig kind of a little bit deeper with both of y'all into how you kind of created spaces where folks were comfortable hearing new ideas. So how y'all kind of created spaces where y'all were comfortable hearing new ideas, or staff were comfortable hearing new ideas and new ways to do things. So how you cultivated spaces for folks who might have been hesitant at first around kind of new strategies around engaging with youth about their LGBTQ identities, or in Louis, your case with pastors kind of who might not have been able to see initially how their faith could kind of coexist with accepting LGBTQ folks into their congregations. And I'll start with the Douglas County folks again, if y'all don't mind. How did you kind of create a space where those folks who might have been a little skeptic at first felt comfortable kind of exploring that skepticism and kind of opening their minds to doing things in a different way related to LGBTQ youth?
I think the way that we did that, and I think in most organizations, it was kind of like what Louise said. We didn't force anything. We brought in the community advocate. He is great. He did tremendous in the work of training. And I think allowing staff to express their uncomfortable, and accepting that and not pushing it and giving people time and space to accept, and kind of understand that, like you said, with the data and the numbers, things are showing, and the generation that we're dealing with, who's coming through and who are we coming in. These kids, it was a different generation. It was a different type of kid. And so we have to learn to change with the times. And so I think giving the staff the space, allowing them to express, I believe with probation, one of the things was, like Tina said, they allowed them to express their uncomfortable, but this is why it's important. This is why this work is important, because there's a population that we're missing. And if we do not allow that, then we're going to keep missing that void of these youth who time after time again get left behind, end up homeless, or we're just missing that piece. So I think really focusing with the staff and partnering with the staff, just really connecting with them and allowing them to express without feeling like they're doing something wrong, because you have to give people time to accept change. So I think that's the big piece, is just allowing people that time to say it's okay to be uncomfortable, but this is why we need this work, is because this is going to really help us move forward in our community, because this is a big piece that we're missing. You know, these kids are often being left behind. These kids are often getting deeper in the system without the help. So we have to step up and be a leader with this. So I think giving staff time.
I think just to add to that, is we did phases of training too. Like, you know, we did an initial SOGI 101, and then we did a more in-depth training. And then even with the staff that were having issues, then bringing her back in and having more conversations and stuff. So I think it just wasn't a one-time training and we were done. It's just been always a continuous set of training and answering questions and checking back in with people, which is very helpful.
Yeah, that's so important, kind of meeting people where they are, and if they're not where you want them to be yet, kind of continuing to reiterate that message. That's an awesome strategy. Luis, is there anything you would like to add on this question around kind of overcoming skepticism?
No, and it's exactly that, meeting participants, clients where they're at. I think that's really the biggest thing, the biggest takeaway that I got from Bridge. You know, physically going to see a pastor. I know Zoom is really great. You know, we connect from all over the world, but really physically seeing the pastor and talking face to face, so they can feel your passion. They can see, you know, how much you care about this program and how much the data is there, and, you know, the feelings that we get. I think feeling that energy, exceeding that energy with someone is really powerful, and meeting them where they're at, you know, that can really change the script quickly, right? If they're on the fence, if they see you, they feel more comfortable around you, you're having a conversation, you're talking for an hour, you're talking about golf for 25 minutes, and then you're going into it, you know, so you're not go straight into the program and the nuances. That really helped. So I think that human aspect and going the extra mile for them to be more comfortable, especially, you know, when you're talking about faith, LGBTQ folks, and homelessness, you know, mixing those three things together can make anyone uncomfortable, right? So just having that human touch, I think, really went a long way for me.
Awesome. Thanks, Luis. I think Ariel might have a question. I want to make sure I'm leaving space. I think you had a hand up.
Hey, I'm not Ariel. I'm Janique. I'm a coworker here, also at Safe Haven. I'm also taking a training with her. You know, just cultivating spaces where people are able to be themselves and use their past experiences and life learned things to be able to express themselves, to understand what trans is. I believe that we're in a day and age where someone, I would say within a secondary meeting of you, will be able to understand that we're all connected to someone that's trans somewhere. It's a friend, it's a cousin, it's an uncle, it's an aunt, it's a coworker, you know. So to try to make the employees feel comfortable is one thing. Also to let them know through life experience, use the things that you know from, you know, being around people that you already know that are trans, or that you already have been, you know, experienced the things that you experienced with LGBTQ people, or to that nature. Exactly. And also with us, our organization is through life experiences. So for us, it's a little easier to cultivate that conversation between the clients and the co-workers and everyone else, because we are a trans-led organization. So patients early on in a child's youth shouldn't be a cutoff or a starting age. Whenever they stressed at that point in time, you know? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a super helpful perspective. And I think you cut out a little bit in the middle. So I hope I'm not projecting anything onto your comment. You're totally fine. But I really want to highlight how what you said ties to what Luis said about really bringing things to that human level when you're talking about LGBTQ issues. folks know folks who are LGBTQ. And all of these people, we are all humans, all the same as each other.
Exactly.
And so it's really important to bring it to that level.
Exactly. Most definitely.
Awesome. Thank you. Looking at the time, I want to make sure we get into some of our training and implementation questions. So I'll go ahead and pass it on to Amber related to training.
Awesome. And I think one of the questions that we just received kind of ties it in nicely to training. So Stephanie had asked, how did you respond in your outreach or in your training to staff who might unknowingly have had harmful perspectives, like, oh, it's none of my business to ask this question, or we treat everyone the same, so it doesn't really matter what their identities are. So I wanted to open up to all the panelists and see your responses to that.
I think that was the key part of the training, is that training talked about identity, that we all have all these identities, right? Like I'm a mom, I'm a friend, all of the things. And to really help perspective take for folks who didn't want to ask that one sliver. We're asking kids about their whole life. We want to ask them about their whole life. We want to know the whole kid. And so there was that perspective taking that I think was helpful. It didn't, the training didn't simply just come in and talk about sexual orientation and gender identity. It was about identity and how critical it is for a young person's entire identity to be known and for you to want to know that kid.
For us over here at HOPIX, we didn't have a lot of training internally for HOPIX staff because, this program was just under me. So it was kind of an army of one for this program. So, and it wasn't traditional in the sense where I have to go through the coordinated entry system or the CES system, which is our housing system here in Los Angeles. Reunification was done through the home, going back to the home through the parents. So they didn't have to do a lot of training internally with a lot of conversations, unless they were kind of part of the program, but not really in a way where they're kind of like supervisors and managers in the sense where I had to get some feedback and buy-in for things. But I didn't really have much training to do internally. Now that we're having conversations around, starting a youth center and, how we're asking our new questions for our frontline staff, our case manager asking different questions around gender identity and sexual orientation, we're now answering those questions thanks to this program. We're getting inspired in a sense. So during the time we didn't have a lot of training. Now that we're seeing the need of it, now we're seeing the gaps in our system. We're now answering those questions and we're having these larger trainings for sure.
Oh, you're muted, Amber.
Of course. Thank you both for your perspectives. And to further responding to Stephanie's questions, and from what I've heard from you all, it's a part of it is, yes, kids are all the same, but when you don't know part of their identity, you're not really knowing who they are. And so this is an important part of the conversation. And also, technically, we don't treat everyone the same. When they're coming into the space, they don't feel safe. And that's an internal thing. Maybe from the outside, staff don't see that. But if they don't feel safe coming into a space, they're not being treated the same. They're not feeling the same. And so it really is not the same. Even when staff, from their perspective, it seems that way. And training is provide a really great platform for folks to talk through it. And especially as Sean, LaShara, and Tina, y'all talked about within your staff, you really created that safe space for them to explore, for them to disagree, for them to kind of work through their issue. It's not going to change overnight. And Luis, for your work with the pastors, it doesn't change overnight. It requires multiple conversations, perspective taking, convincing, maybe showing a little data to see like, hey, this is an actual issue, and also humanizing that experience. And training really provides a platform to kind of achieve all of those things. That is wonderful. And so I want to dive into the training and the itsy bitsy details there a little bit. And I'm hoping, and I will start with Luis. I'm going to flip it because earlier we started with Douglas County. Can you share a little bit in terms of what the trainings look like? And perhaps you can dive in a little bit about like within your organization, what that looks like to getting folks up to speed about understanding youth and especially LGBTQ plus youth, but also, for the pastors, I remember you mentioning creating an online platform for them to be engaged in that conversation. And I would love for you to dive into that a little bit. And then for Douglas County, as Louise is talking, it would be good I would love to hear more in terms of how the training actually get rolled out from, the Juvenile Assessment Center, from the detention, from probation. What does that look like? Are the trainings one and done? Are they frequent, reoccurring? Have they been embedded as part of like the ongoing process? Are new staff also being trained? What does that look like? So a little more detail here, I think folks would benefit from hearing. So I'll start with you, Luis.
Yeah, so I started training within myself first. That's number one, right? I'm not part of the LGBTQ+ community. I'm an ally, I'm a friend. I'm there to support always. But it really started with myself, understanding the history of LGBTQ folks here in South LA, learning the history of South LA as well. I'm not from Los Angeles. I'm from the East Coast. So really understanding the history and training myself to better work with the population is really where I started. Talking with the LA LGBT Center, who work with youth every single day, going to the Hollywood center to see how they function and run things, training for myself so I can, be the best coordinator I can for these youth. When it comes to internal trainings, we do a lot of partnerships with organizations like the Trans Latina Coalition here in Los Angeles, the LA LGBT Center, the Hollywood one in the Center South. They help us a lot on these topics. So it's really sourcing out the experts in your field is really how we found, because I'm not an expert, right? Our organization isn't, but there are experts out there who can come in, who can design the training, who can, so it's really sourcing those organizations to come in and do that. And what was that third? There was a third part of your question, Amber, which I forgot.
Around the pastor training or
right, the toolkit, right? The toolkit, we're currently developing it, and it's going to really focus on, like I said, inclusive language, the basics. What does LGBTQIA+ stand for? Like, what does that look like? What is the difference between sexual orientation and gender identity? So the basics for pastors, while also incorporating, scriptures, a model. There's a theological framework to the course as well. So it's really an interactive. There's videos. I'll be talking in the course as well about my experience and working with pastors and youth. So it's very interactive. There's a lot of functions for pastors to come in and to apply what they learn in the course into their own congregation, to expand, to ask questions, to have these conversations like we're having today, right, with other pastors, which is really what we want. So they can spread the word, and create change within their own congregation and within their own church and largely in their own community as well. So that's really the 3 steps right there.
I love that. What about for Douglas County?
So like with probation, we did have our community leader that came in and did a couple rounds of training. And that was just more specific to Douglas County. And then we developed a training from those trainings to be done statewide. So all of the new probation officers, assistant probation officers, supervisors are all trained in our new officer training about what is SOGI, like examining and distinguishing concepts for SOGI, as well as the terminology, and discussing that with them. So they all get that in their new officer training. We often do have, ongoing trainings that officers are able to participate in. It isn't something that's mandatory. It's more of, if they have an interest or they have, wanting to get more information, then there's those ongoing trainings that they're able to get. So that's kind of what we did here with probation and expanding it to the whole probation system in the state of Nebraska.
So for us, this is actually an area of challenge for us at our level at the assessment center, because we don't have sort of that infrastructure that probation has. We're a small but mighty team. And so we have not had a training mechanism for new folks coming in, new team members joining us. And this is kind of a good catalyst for really navigating how that can look. Part of our onboarding for new staff is just simply our procedures that include asking those questions and how those fit in with our overall assessment process, which is just structured interviews. And so we don't currently have something where we are intentionally training new staff. So really looking forward to this, energizing that effort for us.
From a detention standpoint, I think it was very tough because, of course, detention is very disciplined and stay within the structure, policy, things of that nature. So getting that mindset to understand that, the staff to kind of focus and want to understand that we need to really focus and help these youth. Safety, to me, is the biggest concern of making sure that we are, paying attention to these youth and watching these youth. So I think once that training was completed, that allowed for the actual training for staff that came in, where they brought in a piece that talked about pronouns that allowed staff to get more comfortable with accepting pronouns. I think one of the biggest things that came out of this training for detention standpoint was that if a youth comes in and says that they identify as a female, then that youth was actually placed on a female unit, whereas prior it did not matter. It was that cookie cutter mindset that if you're a male, you're to be with you're on a male mod. So safety risk, and I think that was the biggest thing that came out of this whole connection for a detention standpoint for us.
That is awesome. I appreciated all of your perspectives and candidness. Like Sean mentioned, this is a space where we are always continue to striving for doing better, and thank you for sharing your challenges as well. Luis, I think this might be a good question for you. One of the questions is around handling trans youth guardians and interacting with parents who might not quite agree with the lifestyle, in quotes here. And I know you had done some of the work with parents as well. And so I'm wondering if you have some insights there. And also for Sean, Tina, and LaShare, if y'all have points that you want to jump in, please feel free as well.
Right. I think the best way to tackle this is not to guess, but, I'm not a trans person. I mean, I don't know the trans experience. I don't know, what that brings and, the nuances and all that, because I'll never understand it, right? So as asking the youth, who's trans, who's living the experience, who's going through all this trauma is, what do you want to see? What do you want your relationship to be like with your parent or grandparent? What does that look like? So having that conversation, I think first and foremost is really important to understand how to approach the situation. Can it be repairable? Does the youth even want to repair the relationship? Is that something they're interested in doing? So I think starting like that would be the best bet. Instead of guessing, you want them to lead, to always lead, to give that feedback. That's how we would approach the situation first.
Awesome.
So LaShare, you may want to hop in on this one this is just a little bit of nuts and bolts that happens in the assessment process, right? And we've seen, across the board different reactions that parents are having when their children are perhaps identifying differently than they had imagined they would when they were small children, right? We have had all the way from parents who are very embracing and accepting, and it's an open conversation, to kids who are, when they're in the office with just us, because our interview is a two-part interview, one with parents and then one with the youth alone, where the youth will share, my mom has an issue with this and that kind of thing, and where we can then connect those youth with community resources or other supports, specific therapists that can help them navigate those other conversations with parents. Then we just one-on-one individually help where we can with those things. And I don't know, LaShare, if you wanted to hop on with any examples or. You're muted.
Sorry. I think the biggest thing is, like you said, when those youth share that information with us, is trying to figure out how to navigate that space in order to allow that youth to still get resources without, if you want to say, offending the parent. So I mean, the great thing for us is we have some partnerships where, we don't always have to ask for the parents' permission. So we have some community partners that we're starting to work with where they can go out and give kids certain resources and things so much without having to get that parent on board, So I think that's a good thing to try to give those kids those resources to be able to help them. Because again, it is a struggle. It is a challenge for some of these kids because their parents just don't want to accept what they're saying. So it's still, we have to figure out how to navigate and get these kids resources in order so that they can get the help and the assistance that they need, despite that barrier, coming from that parent, and that we're trying to disrespect the parent, but we're trying to get those kids the help and the resources that they need. So we still partner with different organizations that can go in and still provide some resources without so much having to need the parents' permission.
And mind you, to add on that, my program focused on 18 to 25-year-olds, so they're already adults. They don't need parent permission as well. So, it's a lot easier for me to work with them and not have to jump through hoops with parents than someone who's under 18 has to go through the system and, parental consent and all those things. So the population and the age range is really, can play a big factor on how you set up your programming or how to, implement any new techniques towards anything.
Thank you all on that. And Lashir, I want to pivot a little bit and ask a couple of questions that's around the detention. There are a few interests in the questions around detention. One is if Nebraska's detention is set up in single rooms or is it like multiple kids in one? And also they're wondering, Stephanie is wondering if as part of the training, housing access to placement is based on identity. Is that specific to the detention center that you worked in, or is it part of a larger state effort?
So it actually was set up with a single bed facility. It was single bed. However, with the population at one time, in the early 2000s, we would put 2 kids in a room. Once we started going to this, it went back to worrying about safety and things happened. So there was 1 kid to a room. Once we also implemented this, as far as it was specific to our detention facility. It was not anything that was statewide like probation. It was just specific to Douglas County Youth Center, with me being on that committee and bringing back that information and us partnering. So it was more of a Douglas County thing, more than statewide as far as detention centers.
And I just want to add to that. So it is not, as far as placements go, there's still licensing issues of placing youth that identify as female that are, biologically male. And so we're not as fortunate in some of our placements outside of the detention center that are allowed to put them in the placement with the identified gender that they identify with. So that's still a barrier here in Nebraska.
And we are very much close to our time at the top of the hour. But before we do close, I do want to ask one question for all of the panelists is what advice do you have for jurisdictions or organizations and communities looking to engage and work similar to yours? And I will let you all decide who to go first.
Okay, I'm going to hop on. Reach out to the experts. Luis well said it, reach out to people with lived experience, reach out to the kids who know. One thing I think I was remiss in saying, the questions that we ask the kid when we're asking about identity, we reached out to Ceres. And Angela Irvine was on faculty then when we were in the capstone program, and then we received TA to develop those questions, to develop that script. So it wasn't just we all came up willy-nilly with things. We really used both professional experts and then our youth and families with lived experience to develop everything that we do.
Yeah, and I'll go next. I absolutely everything that Sean said. I think that it's very important to get the lived experience. And so I just want to echo that, as well as, with us with me being an ally, right, and getting those people that are able to sometimes have those conversations that I maybe am not able to have with certain people because of me being an ally. And so having somebody that actually has that experience was helpful for us and our process, because they were able to steer us in the right direction.
And I'll just piggyback off of both of them. They're correct with having live experience, having the ally. I just think you have to have a wide range of team, right? You have to have, the actual LGBT youth involved. You have to have just different stakeholders at the table. And I think one of the great things about our team was we were able to have, people who can actually make some real change, such as judges and things of that nature on board, to just having just the kids and their identity and them being able to help us. So I think having a wide range of people in different spaces who can help is a big part of this work, because you have to have the people in the spaces that can make the change, but you also have to have the voices that are the change. So I just think you have to have all of that on one team in order to make this work.
Yeah, sorry. One thing for me, I would say is, if you can, pay your experts too. So we gave every church a stipend to be part of the program, and with that stipend came, different things, whether it's doing workshops, having resources, and a bunch of other things that churches had to do. So it's not we're just like giving to them, but they have things to do as well, so they can be interacting with, the program and the text and everything that we're doing. So if you can pay them, it's really important, especially when it comes to churches, they're losing members, they're losing money, and a lot of churches, they need those funds. So if you can, do it for sure. And I think the last thing, reach out to the experts. I'm sure Douglas, the Douglas County team, and myself, we're here to support you all with whatever you need. So just reach out. You have our contact. So whatever we need, we're here to help. So.
Thank you, all of you. Thank you so much to our amazing panelists for sharing your experiences and being so honest and direct with us today, sharing not only your progress, but also your challenges. Luis, Tina, LaShare, and Sean, thank you so much. You are inspiring, and it's a privilege getting to learn about your work, and we appreciate your time and contributions. And to our audience, thank you all for joining us today and being part of this important conversation. We hope today's discussion have provided you with some new perspectives and actionable ideas. And also in the chat, I have put in the supporting system involved LGBTQ youth certificate program information. If y'all are interested in learning more about that, please reach out. Let's see, Alex, do you mind just flashing our contact information on the screen real quick? We'll also be sharing the recording of this webinar with you all, and this information will also be available online. Again, we really appreciate your attention and time spent listening to our experts, and thank you all so much. I hope you all have a really wonderful rest of the day.